Welcome to yet another question and response session. I love being in conversation with you like this. As you know, we have these regularly inside of our private Vaginismus Sisters community, and you're welcome to join us live. So if you want to be with me right here in Zoom and be in interaction, face-to-face, asking your questions, you're absolutely welcome to. And at the same time, I'm keeping track and looking over in the comment section of the Facebook group for you to be commenting and interacting as we speak and asking additional questions that might come up real time, live with us. Okay, so you have all the different ways to get involved in this chat. I usually say this at the start, and you've probably heard me say it before, but what's really important for us to keep in mind is that this is a question and response session. And the reason I call it this is because I don't believe any single person has the answer that's applicable to every body, every mind, every nervous system, and every soul. There is no one size fits all approach. And I was incredibly frustrated in my own personal vaginismus journey when my doctors pretended to have all the answers and they told me one thing and they sent me. Unfortunately, they didn't send me to too many specialists, and I didn't even know about a pelvic floor physical therapist at the time. But I was definitely given recommendations that I trusted because I felt like there's this medical professional who seems to be certain in his answer. In my case, it was a male. And I didn't really trust my own gut and my own intuition, and I kind of took it for face value. So in my work, the way that I support fellow Vaginismus sisters, I support you, from all around the world, I love to just give this permission slip to all of us that anything that you hear out there may be right for you. But at the end of the day, what's most important is that you listen to your own gut and intuition. And a really big part of the journey with overcoming vaginismus is actually connecting to our body's wisdom. So my responses today, if you hear anything that feels like, I'm not sure about that, I invite you to take my words with a grain of salt and really dive deeper and do your own digging into what is right for you. And the holistic approach that I invite you to really is that it's empowering you in an emotional, physical, erotic, and also mental way with all of those considerations to be listening to your body's wisdom and allowing her to lead the way with creating safety in your system, down-regulating your nervous system, and being able to move forward in each pillar of the journey of overcoming vaginismus at your own pace and with your own inner wisdom leading the way. So that's why it's called question and response. My name is Katrin. If you don't know me already, I used to experience vaginismus. My journey had started a long time before this moment, but the moment that I kind of gained awareness about what was happening is when I first tried having PIV sex, penis and vagina sex, with my boyfriend at the time. And I was 18 years old, and I was met with the brick wall where my vaginal opening should have been. And it was, but a part of me was actually doubting that it existed because I hadn't really explored my vulva and the area around my vaginal opening. There was really this tightness, this brick wall. We tried to push through, and eventually we did with my partner in the next couple of attempts, which opened up the brick wall a little bit, but I was met with excruciating pain. And I know that you know what that feels like. And I don't think anyone but a fellow Vaginismus sister really will understand. So for the last 5 years, after having overcome vaginismus, and in a way, I like to say that at the time I was able to start to have pain-free penetrative sex, which was 6 years after my initial PIV attempt. A really big part of my journey even started at that moment, which was my journey of gaining sexual confidence, finding out who I am erotically, sexually as a sexual being. And so though my journey was 6 years long, there was also this additional component of a couple of years and a few years, really. And I would say this journey is is a lifelong journey of being really comfortable with our eroticism and actually being in adventure mode with it and exploring and experiencing the things that we now have discovered that we want to experience, feel comfortable to communicate our desires as well as our boundaries. And so for the last 15 years, I've sort of been immersed in this journey. So let's get started. We have 3 beautiful questions. No questions is off limits. Elle says, good morning, I have a question. Amazing. I'm gonna include this question in our conversation. Perfect. Beautiful question. I could very much relate, Elle. So first up, I want to start with this question, which will lead into your question, Elle. I get really anxious that I'm going to hit the cervix, and I'm not sure how much of the dilators I should be inserting. Do you have any advice on this or relieving the anxiety around it? Yes, I do. And I can relate to this anxiety around it. So first, let's talk about hitting the cervix. We're going to talk about the length of dilators, even the average penis size, but let's first kind of understand something that I didn't know at the time, and I like to explain in these conversations as to how our body is so beautifully designed to receive and in a safe context to do so. So our vaginal opening leads into the vaginal canal. And at the end of the vaginal canal, this back wall of the vagina is where the cervix sits. This is the entrance to our uterus. So the vagina, the back wall of the vagina, which is the cervix itself, leads to the uterus. Now, the cervix sits usually, and this changes depending on the time of the month where we are in our cycle, but it can sit about maybe, let's say, up to 1.5 to 2 inches outside of our vaginal opening. It could actually be so shallow at certain times of our menstrual cycle. And when we're bleeding, it's actually the most shallow, closest to our vaginal opening. The cervix, though, it does a really beautiful thing when we're sexually aroused. When we experience pleasure in our body, we experience this arousal, regardless of where our cervix is in relation to our vaginal opening, whether it's sitting shallow or it's a little bit deeper, higher up, meaning there's more space inside of the vagina for entry. But let's just say it's at its lowest point. When we're sexually aroused, the body sends a signal to the brain that says, hey, the bells are ringing, we are liking this. And the brain sends a signal to the cervix to say, sexual arousal is happening, you should be expecting some guests up in here. And what the cervix does is it actually moves up and out of the way to make space for penetration. Now, I'm about to give you some metrics here. But what's really important to understand is this principle that our body is designed upon sexual arousal to know that it can, and it does in its way of design, is meant to make space for penetration and invite a visitor in a way that's comfortable and roomy, okay? So if the cervix was at 2 inches, it could actually rise all the way up to about 8 inches away from the vaginal opening, creating so much space in the vagina to receive a tampon. A tampon usually doesn't need that much space, a dilator, a sex toy, or a penis. Okay, so therefore, it's really important for us to actually incorporate sexual arousal as part of our dilating practice. We've got to be experiencing pleasure before inserting something inside, because that is the only way the body's actually going to know that it's got to prepare for that experience. What happens when we attempt to dilate and we're inserting something with absolutely no sexual arousal going on is the body actually gets shocked into that experience. All of a sudden, it's got guests, and it feels like, oh, I had no idea this is happening. Like, why didn't anyone tell us, right? Why wasn't there any sexual arousal to ring the doorbell and let us know that we're about to be hosts? So that's really, really key to understand, is how wise our body is and how beautifully it's designed to create space for that experience. So the vagina typically is between 3 to 6 inches long, but it can stretch to 8 to 9 inches, like I said. So that means the space from the vaginal opening to the cervix can be as low as actually 2, maybe 3 inches, could move up to 6 inches, but during sexual arousal, it moves up to make space for 8 to 9 inches. To give you an idea, the length between here and here is around 4 inches. So if you think about double that, this is how much space we've got, right? Look at your own hand. This is how much space that our body creates for penetration. Now, when we're talking about the average erect penis size, that is about 5.1 to 5.5 inches long. 5.1 to 5.5 inches long. So perhaps this long might be the average size. And now let's compare this to a dilator. So dilator number 1 is about that long. Dilator number 5 is closest to the average penis size, because dilator number 5 is 5 inches long and dilator number 6 is 5.6 inches long. This is from a standard dilator set. I'm referring to the Intimate Rose one right here as one example, but other 8-piece dilator sets like Soul Source, for example, has very similar measurements. If you head to my Love Diary blog, you can see, if you search for my parents, you'll see why that is. But if you search for that keyword, you'll find my review of the Intimate Rose dilator set, which I recommend very highly. It is a very comfortable silicone set. And there you'll also see the diameter, so the girth of the dilator, so that you can kind of compare those measurements for yourself as well. But the lengths is what I'm sharing here. That dilator 5 or dilator 6 is about the average erect penis size, meaning you may not even need to use dilator 7 and 8. Sometimes we open that box, and I remember doing the same, and I looked at the biggest dilator in my box, and I was using the Laura Berman set of plastic dilators, which was awful because plastic is not comfortable. So I recommend that you stay away from any plastic dilators. But I remember like being in shock of, oh my goodness, is this supposed to fit in my body? And what's true is that it can, but it doesn't necessarily have to, because you get to decide what your goal size is based on average statistics, based on a partner, if you have one, and really whatever your intimacy goals are. Okay, so that's a little bit of the statistics around length, which I hope eases your anxiety already a little bit, knowing that you, first of all, have a lot of space in the vagina when sexual arousal is present, especially. And you don't have to use the largest dilators. And also, you get to choose how much you want to insert. At every single moment, you get to gauge and be in communication with your body and in communication with your partner or yourself if you're dilating, right? How far to go, and whether in this moment you're experiencing comfort and therefore you can go another little bit deeper, or if you're just experiencing discomfort and pain, it's important not to push through that, right? That's the golden rule of dilating, is that no pain should be present, because it deepens the cycle of pain. So I just share this to let you know that you are in complete control. And though, yes, I know that penetration requires us to find safety and surrender, you still get to call the shots. And it really is a deep emotional journey to finding safety and surrender, and finding safety in the unknown. And I like to say that penetrative sex, especially as vagina owners, is the most vulnerable thing that we can do ever in our lives, in my opinion, because we are welcoming another human being inside of us. That requires such vulnerability and surrender and openness. So of course we have anxiety and fear around this experience. It's a pretty big deal. And what's true is that you are the master of your own body. And when we get comfortable knowing that and communicating that, we don't have to push beyond our limits in any way. Okay. So now let's also discuss, what happens if we do hit the cervix. So just as we have these preconceived notions because of how we're conditioned in our society, that first time sex, penetrative sex, is gonna hurt or supposed to hurt, or it's normal for it to hurt, which is not true. Unfortunately, it's been our experience, but it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? When we expect for something to hurt, it also has more likelihood that that's going to happen because we brace and we tighten and we're not quite feeling safe in the experience. But the other thing too that we hear is that if you touch your cervix, it's going to be an incredibly sharply painful experience. And that is also not always true. In fact, we can have cervical orgasms with gentle massage on the cervix, or a nice pulsing sensation on the cervix. When you get familiar with your cervix and you understand what she likes and what she doesn't, there is a lot of opportunity for pleasure in that space. And many of us hold a lot of suppressed emotion in the cervix. So that part is absolutely true. But what I'm getting at is that you get to be in exploration with her in a really gentle way that doesn't create a massive amount of pain. And if you are going to be massaging and getting to know her and allowing for those suppressed emotions to actually rise up to the surface to be released, that is also a really healing part of practicing penetration with yourself or a partner. So please know that you don't have to stray away from accidentally touching the cervix. In fact, that's an experience that you can invite in your practice. And I've talked about trigger point release before, also called vaginal de-armoring or yoni mapping. I have video guidance on how to incorporate this in your dilating practice as part of some of the programs that I offer. And working with that cervical healing is a really beautiful portion of what trigger point release can include. And in fact, just yesterday, I was having penetrative sex with my partner, and I'm getting more and more curious about having a cervical orgasm because I haven't had a cervical orgasm yet. At least I don't believe I have. It's supposed to be this incredibly full body experience, specifically from massaging the cervix. And so yesterday we were exploring with that cervical massage intentionally because I would like to experience a cervical orgasm in my lifetime. And I just last night experienced a layer of emotional release that happened as a result of this gentle cervical massage. Now, it was not excruciatingly painful. What it was is there was an area, especially on the right side, on the kind of this bulb of the cervix, that felt a little bit just uncomfortable. Also emotionally, because it started to bring up stuff, and I'm not entirely sure what, because the suppressed emotions often don't come with the story of why you're releasing, why you're crying. But upon a little bit more massage, and I was guiding my partner on how to pulse and what pace and what pressure, I ended up crying. And it felt also like this layer of frustration and anger that was coming out in that release. So all of that is to say that being in interaction with our cervix can lead to a lot of beautiful emotional healing and release and relaxation as a result, because in fact, what emotions being stored in our body actually looks like is tightness. So you're going to see, whether it's with the cervix or not, that internal massage of the vagina through trigger point release, also called vaginal de-armoring and yoni mapping, that is very often going to result in some sort of emotional release that's happening in your body. And that is a really, really good sign. So I hope that eases some of your anxiety around how much of a dilator to insert, what the ranges are that are possible. And again, coming back to dilator 8's, the largest length is 6.5 inches. Dilator 8 is 6.5 inches, and your vagina is capable of 8 to 9 inches, right? So there's room to play there. And of course, our bodies are different. So yours might be more than that. Yours might be a little bit less than that. And depending on how deeply sexually aroused you are, you're also going to see a range of, when you're more sexually aroused, the vagina tense. That's kind of the term for it. It's tenting. It does that even more deeply. So it creates more space upon deeper sexual arousal. So that's my advice on relieving anxiety around it. Please let me know if you have any follow-up questions related to that, and maybe share in our Vaginismus Sisters group any experiences you've had with trigger point release and vaginal dearmoring, or maybe any emotional release that has happened for you during dilating even, because that very much can happen as well, or even during massage. I have a blog on two blogs actually, on 2 massage experiences in which I bawled my eyes out because there was suppressed emotion, often very much around our core muscles. So massaging your core muscles, the quads for me had held a lot of emotion, and creating relaxation and easing tension in those areas is fantastic for the pelvic floor muscles as well. So I'm checking in on the comments here. I would like to answer this next question. Okay, so I have a question. Is it good to practice with a dildo? And why do I feel embarrassed about it? LOL. Beautiful question. Is it good to practice with a dildo, and why do I feel embarrassed about it? I want you to know that I was embarrassed about it also. And in fact, there are layers around why this might be, and I want to share some ideas with you. But first, to clearly state that it is good to practice with a dildo. Absolutely. It is incredibly appropriate to practice with a dildo at any stage of your journey. And many of us decide to do so, and I support women and guide women in the process between dilating and transitioning to PIV sex to actually be dilating with a dildo. There's so many reasons for this. One, our perception of the penis shape, even on an emotional level, and when it comes to like our relationship to the man's body, can sometimes use some love and some healing and some familiarity, some more familiarity with it. I remember being kind of like, I don't know about this, like not really attracted to the shape of the penis, feeling a little bit scared of it, feeling a little bit disgusted of it also. Back in the day, that was the same for my relationship to my own vulva. I didn't want to touch her. I was kind of grossed out by bodily fluids. And it's that entire relationship to our human bodies and the male body that we get to explore more deeply when we work and interact with a dildo, whether just visually, through touch, and also through penetration. So aside from that emotional and mental perception, there's the physical component that our body and our nervous system really has to get used to the idea of a different shape and the sensation of that different shape entering us. Because the shape of a dildo, the shaft of the penis and the head of the penis, they have a slightly different shape than those tapered dilators, right? The head is a little bit wider and then it gets a little bit narrower. So that can act as a psychological barrier to actually feeling like we can relax, because already we're seeing like, oh, this is wider. Am I capable of that? And that can create a little bit of that bracing and avoidance and therefore tightening in the pelvic floor muscles. So it's really important that we practice with a penis shape to decrease the distance of the new steps that we need to take in the transition of PIV sex. If you have just practiced with a dilator and then all of a sudden expect yourself to go into a PIV sex experience, even without incorporating the dilator with your partner, then that's a pretty big leap that you have to take, a pretty big leap of faith. And I do believe that every single step of our journey requires a leap of faith, but it's up to us to design the transition in a way that the leap feels manageable. It doesn't feel like it's too much too soon. So part of the transition may include using that largest dilator goal size first by yourself, but also inviting a partner to use that dilator size or even start at a lower dilator size again as you get used to it, and be in communication with your partner where he or she is holding the dilator and is moving it for you. That in itself requires a layer of safety in the surrender to another human being in charge of how the dilator penetrates you. And that is a really great practicing ground to then feeling safe to surrender to that same human being entering you with their body. And in the space between that gap can also be incorporating exactly that dildo, so that first you worked with it yourself, then your partner worked with it, and then later your partner can work with the dilator, the dildo, and then his own body. Okay, so that is when using a dildo is most appropriate. And you can also incorporate smaller size dildos kind of as you go up in dilator sizes. And as for feeling embarrassed about it, it really is incredibly normal for us to feel embarrassed about it. Unfortunately, we have been conditioned as women in the world that we're not supposed to have as high of a sexual desire as men, or that's not really something that's celebrated. In fact, it's frowned upon. Where it is celebrated for the guys to have a lot of sex, it's frowned upon for the girls to have a lot of sex, being called all these different words. Whereas the guys are like, oh yeah, you got another one, and the girl is being called a slut, for example, right? So there's a lot of associations, even societally, in how we're conditioned, in the family, how you've been conditioned, or religiously, how you've been conditioned to see sex and pleasure as dirty and sinful. And especially moving between this association that dilating is this medical, therapeutical thing. And now a dildo is, ooh, we're adding pleasure component here, or we're adding the turn on here, we're adding the wild woman piece of desire and arousal here. Why do we see this as not okay and this as okay? It's pretty messed up. We are designed as beings that are designed to enjoy pleasure. Our clitoris, the only purpose that it serves is for pleasure, not for reproduction. So we are being called to, in this journey, to come to a place of celebration and healing associated to our own relationship to pleasure, that it's okay to want sex, that it's okay to initiate sex. I was very much on the other side of the spectrum with this. I felt like I shouldn't be wanting sex. My relationship to self-pleasure, as I've shared in other programs that I have, as well as some question and response sessions, was one that was very much shame-ridden. And we all grew up in a shame-steeped culture around sex and pleasure. So it's very normal that you might be experiencing tidbits of this in different stages of your journey. There may be other things that come to me associated with dildos. Also, the act of actually purchasing a sex toy. That's something that I've also written about in my blog, and I speak about pretty often. It's a bit of a challenge and another leap of faith to be actually witnessed in that experience of being at the checkout counter, like I was when I bought my first sex toy. It was a Kegel ball set. As though that validated that I was in the sex store, that I bought something that's more for therapeutical purposes. But I don't recommend that you use Kegel balls, by the way, while we're experiencing vaginismus. That's a whole other story. But I remember being at that checkout counter and purchasing this toy and moving through all of those feelings of like, oh, is this okay? And reminding myself that the sex toy clerks does this for a living. It's completely normal for them. That was an initiation, and perhaps there is an uninitiation that is waiting for you associated with a purchase of a sex toy that is not a dilator set. And when you do, I invite you to message me so I can celebrate you. If you have done so already, if you've experienced different kinds of toys, if you enjoy toys and have kind of learned about what you like and what you don't like, I invite you to also share that in our group so we can be in conversation about that topic as well. And we can celebrate you for how far you've come in that journey. Okay. So I trust that that is supportive for you. If there's any other follow-up with this question, I'd love to hear it so we can dive deeper. Beautiful. So we've got 2 more questions. The next question is, can I get cured with dilation alone and no professional intervention? Can I get cured with dilation alone and no professional intervention? So I want to split this question into 2 because my response for each one is actually quite different. And then we're also going to touch on this terminology that quite often gets used in the experience of vaginismus of getting cured. There's something I want to say about this as well. Okay. So first up, can I overcome vaginismus with no professional intervention? Yes, you can. You absolutely can. I'm an example of that. I have shared before that I wish I had more support in my journey. I wish I knew about some medical professionals in our communities that I believe are the best people to support us in the physical aspects of the journey. And those are pelvic floor physical therapists. If you have the opportunity and the pleasure to meet a pelvic floor physical therapist who is well-versed in supporting women in overcoming vaginismus, and you have the access to that kind of help, please arm yourself with a team, as many people as possible to support you. That is a beautiful way that you can feel more at ease with taking each step of your journey, and especially in the physical components, right? It's important not to jump there too quickly. Way too many of us are told to dilate as the #1 thing. And so we either head to a pelvic floor physical therapist or we poke ourselves with a dilator at home. And unfortunately, because we haven't done a lot of the emotional, the subconscious, as well as the erotic components that are required for the body to feel safe to open, what we end up doing is we end up deepening the cycle of pain when we use the dilator too soon, and in the way that is actually not helpful, because I made so many mistakes in my dilating practice because I dove into that first. That's what I was told to do with plastic dilators on top of that. So it's really, really important that we actually do the other components first, and then we do the physical. But if you can be supported by a pelvic floor physical therapist, please be supported by one. And if that doesn't seem like it is an option, or your body is guiding you to do this kind of work with yourself in the comfort of your own home, in the safety of your own home, by yourself, and with support of potentially online programs like the ones that I offer, then that might be the right path for you. So I'm an example that this works. A lot of the women that I have supported, my clients, are examples that having no professional intervention is also possible. There's one woman, G, that I'm thinking about. She was also supported while we were working together by a pelvic floor physical therapist. And in her testimonial that she wrote to me after, she shares that her pelvic floor physical therapist was so pleasantly surprised every time that she came into the session with her. She had said, the physical therapist, that she had never seen anyone progress with dilators as fast as she had. That is testament of the holistic approach that we move through together. I believe it was in month 3, maybe 2. I don't remember what her story had said. You can find out about her also on my website and the Love Diary blog. She got pregnant. She is currently the mother of a baby girl, and I've seen pictures of her, and we celebrated also with her husband on our last call together. This kind of thing is possible, and I share this just as an example and hopefully as motivation and inspiration and a sense of hope, that spark of hope that it's possible for you too. Okay, so yes, overcoming vaginismus with no professional intervention, absolutely doable, possible, and in fact may also be more pleasurable and less stressful and cheaper as well, as you'll see in some of the opportunities that you have to get involved in our community, because there's a whole new experience coming up for you. So this is a little teaser that there is a fantastic way that is incredibly affordable for you to have this guidance available for you, video guidance, practices, meditations, resources, community, basically in the back pocket, on your phone, on your computer, provided by me. And this is my deepest life work. It brings me so much joy to support you in claiming your sexual liberation. And I've been working over the last couple of weeks in the redesign of my website, a brand new website coming up. The first one that I made was made completely by myself, 95% by myself, and now no longer represents the kind of work that I do in its scope. And there's going to be new experiences for our Vaginismus Sisters community coming up on it. I'm so excited for that. But let's talk about the other aspect of your question. And before I say that, I just want to add that I see a lot of purpose in the reason that I needed to go through this journey without professional intervention. Even though I would have wanted that support, I could see why now, today, I had to make so many mistakes along the way so that I can help you avoid them. And if I hadn't made as many, maybe I wouldn't have been passionate about this work, because it wouldn't have been that painful for me to be spending 6 to 8 years overcoming vaginismus and claiming my sexual liberation. Because it was a really impactful part of my life, I got inspired to bring my story and create this community for us. And so I can see purpose in it, but of course, I would never want to repeat what that was like. And I know that you don't want to repeat it either. So our common mission is to help you move yourself, lead yourself through this and claim your sexual liberation as fast as possible and as pleasurably as possible. Okay. Now, can I do it with dilation alone? You can overcome vaginismus without professional intervention, and I don't believe that you can with dilation alone. I really don't believe that after having experienced vaginismus, potentially also receiving that confirmation from a professional, even though you don't need that because you know your body best, but with everything, all of the layers that led for the body to protect us in this way, I don't believe that taking a silicone dilator and inserting it in our vagina is going to be enough to create relaxation and safety and downregulation in our nervous system to then overcome vaginismus and be having pleasurable penetrative sex and be completely expressed in our sexuality and our eroticism, and to have healed a lot of the relational dynamics as well as the emotional pain and big T or small t trauma of our past just with these silicone tools. In a way, I want to say it's not that easy, but at the same time, it is easier to do emotional and erotic, the two pillars of emotional and erotic processing and exploration and adventuring. Because when you do that and you set yourself up with the beautiful foundation and the confidence, dilating is going to be way easier. It is every single time when we set the dilators to the side and we say, we're not going to worry about those yet. Let's focus over here. And then when you pick up a dilator, just like, I think it was Elle that I supported from the UK, when she inserted the dilator for the first time after all of our deep work, she wrote to me and she said, I had to look between my legs to make sure that it was that it was in, because I didn't feel a thing. And then afterwards, working with dilator 1 and 2, she had her first internal orgasms because of all of the emotional and erotic components that we had already moved through, where her previous experience with that dilator 1 was the brick wall. That's what happens, is we can move from the brick wall to an easeful transition because of the way that we set up ourselves up and our bodies up emotionally and erotically. Okay, so though it is not possible, in my opinion, to overcome vaginismus just with a dilator, without the emotional and erotic, it is easier to do it when you're not just doing it with a dilator. And it's more holistic. It touches so many aspects of life, and that's what I wish for all of us, is to really pay attention to the bigger picture here and not to cause ourselves unnecessary pain with a dilator. Because I remember when I was just starting my process with overcoming vaginismus, and trigger warning here, I'm about to use the R word, it felt like I was raping myself with the dilator. Because after some time with being able to insert that first dilator in, I was just laying there and I was gritting my teeth through the pain. And I was just pushing through this discomfort, thinking that the dilator is going to relax my muscles, that because it's in there, my muscles are going to get used to it, to the stretch, and then be able to relax. But although that is one function of dilators, that's one way, the stretching of the muscles part that they support us with, that's a really small component. And there's no way that they're going to help. Just like, I did that for a while. I put those dilators in the closet for a long time. With each time that I practically gave up on dilating, there's no way that just having the dilator inside of me was going to help me do what I ended up doing those 6 years later, and have me have pleasurable PIV sex with no limitations today. That simply wasn't going to happen. There's so many other components and layers to it. So let me know if there's any other follow-up curiosities about these two parts of your question. And now I just want to comment on the getting cured part. So the word of getting cured, naturally we use, and I probably use as well in my journey. And I just invite you to stay away from using that kind of language because you don't have anything. You absolutely don't have a disease that requires getting cured of. And I know, and I trust that it will also be the case for you if you choose to take this approach, is that the language that we use, it really has the power to heal. And even healing is a word I'm starting to break up from, but it has the power also to damage. And as soon as we start saying, I have vaginismus as though it is something that I own, and in a way, it starts to become associated with our identity, especially if you say, I have a sexual dysfunction. That's an awful term because it leads to feeling like I am dysfunctional. If I have a sexual dysfunction, well, I must be dysfunctional. That is very disempowering, and it is not the kind of mindset and approach that is going to support us in moving through the protective body response of vaginismus. That is an empowering approach, and that is really the reality of it. The bracing and tightening response that vaginismus is a protective body response. It's our body deciding for us that there is something out there from which it needs to protect us from. That is its biggest responsibility. It's its duty to keep us safe. And vaginismus helps to keep us safe from what we subconsciously consider to be dangerous. So it's a perceived danger. We consciously love our partner, consciously trust our partner. We're very much consciously sexually aroused. The first time I tried to have PIV sex with my partner, I wanted it. I wanted him inside of me. I felt excited by it. But on a subconscious level, I didn't feel safe. And therefore my body, because I couldn't speak my no for myself, my body spoke it for me. Vaginismus speaks our no for us. It protects us. So if you start to use vaginismus as a protective body response that I'm currently experiencing, feel how that feels in your body. Doesn't it automatically feel like a bit of a relief? And also a short-term experience. I am currently experiencing vaginismus. This protective body response is active in my system right now. And overcoming vaginismus is a process of deactivating the protective body response. It may always be a thing that can activate, just like a switch can be turned on and off. But because of the skills that we learn to feel safe in sex, safe in our relationship, safe in the world as a whole, what happens is that we switch the protective body response off and we never have to turn it on again. Who knows? Maybe one day we're about to be sexually assaulted. And thank goodness our body turns it on for us automatically. But outside of a scenario for which it would be absolutely valid, we now have the skills, the lifelong skills, to never have vaginismus come back, to never have the protective body response be on again, because we have found the ability to downregulate our nervous system, to bring our body into a state of relaxation, to deactivate the freeze survival response that vaginismus really is. And that's associated with the downregulation of the nervous system. So it's not on high alert. All of that is a skill that we develop, and therefore vaginismus never comes back. Maybe we have some tightness that happens on one area of our vagina. Maybe we're sitting cross-legged for a long period of time and one section becomes a little bit more sore. And again, we can say, all right, I've got the skills with a little bit of internal massage to release this. And that happens. I have done that, but I have never had to feel like, holy shit, vaginismus is back. Okay, there were 3 moments in the relationship that I was getting out of where it felt like my body is saying no to this person right now. I don't feel safe. I don't feel loved. I don't feel cared for. And again, I thank my body for doing that. But I was able to move through that and notice, oh, what is my body trying to tell me? What are the emotions here? Why don't I feel like having sex with this person right now? Ah, okay, this is why. And you get to be a team with your body again in that continuous communication. And that was 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago, and it hasn't happened since. So I hope that serves you, and I hope that you take away this invitation to take sexual dysfunction out of the vocabulary, getting cured, even having vaginismus out of the vocabulary, and really know that this is not part of your identity. And I feel like we will forever be Vaginismus sisters, but we can be on the other side of this protective body response and remember the experience of being in it while still knowing that, you know, I am a fellow Vaginismus sister. This is part of my story, but it's no longer an active part of my reality and my experience. I'm not seeing any more comments, so I'm going to move to our last question here. How and where to start my journey of recovery when I don't live alone and I don't have a trusted GP? So I think we've already covered the trusted GP part. You don't necessarily need one. And again, it may actually feel safer for your nervous system, as does for many women, to not have to go into the office of a pelvic floor physical therapist or a doctor, to have the crinkly sheets and that environment of the doctor's office, to be able to actually make progress and celebrate your wins and your milestones from your couch or your bed, the comfort of your own home, in a space that feels really comforting and safe and arousing as well. Those are all components that we've got to consider, because the medical environment of being at the office of a GP presents more resistance with which we have to actually deal with to arrive at a space of relaxation and safety and arousal too, because very often a pelvic floor physical therapist is not going to give you the opportunity to be aroused before she starts to work internally or insert something. And for my explanation earlier, this is an important part of the journey. And it's pretty mind-blowing to me that we don't consider that we need to add pleasure on the way to being able to experience pleasurable penetrative sex. If pleasurable penetrative sex is the goal, then why do we leave the pleasure just for that moment? Shouldn't we incorporate the pleasure, get used to the pleasure, start enjoying the pleasure, have the pleasure also dissipate any feelings of discomfort, because that absolutely does happen. So that's that part of the question. And how and where to start the journey of recovering when you don't live alone, that is a big one. It's not impossible to do it, but I want to acknowledge the additional layer of difficulty that this presents. I lived with my parents. When I was 18 years old, I had that first PIV sex experience. or attempt, an excruciating, painful attempt after the first couple of attempts. I was living with my parents. And at the time that I started dilating, I was also still living with my parents. And that was difficult because there is a layer and a sense of, well, I don't feel like I can fully relax here. One, there's a whole conversation to be had about boundaries, because in my family system, we didn't have this habit where my parents would grant me and gift me the gift of privacy as much as I would have wanted. Because especially my mom, she felt like she had the liberty to open my door at any given moment and just come in and start talking to me. Because of course, like I'm not going to be doing anything inappropriate, right? Even that as an idea is really impactful. So I didn't quite feel at ease at home, but I had to work with what I had, right? So a really beautiful piece here is the invitation to start to communicate your needs with the people that you live with. Perhaps those are your parents. Perhaps they're roommates. And how is it that you can guarantee a private space for yourself? That may be while they're home, and you can give that message and communication of, I'm going to need about an hour and a half of time where you don't knock on my door, please, or I'm going to come down when I'm ready, but I need some privacy. You don't have to explain what for. You don't have to explain yourself ever. Whenever you ask for something like this, or whenever you say no, you never have to explain yourself. This is your right. But it's definitely a skill that we've got to learn to develop, is that communication and setting boundaries with it, because many of us have grown up in scenarios where we weren't invited to, we weren't taught to set healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries may have been looked down upon. We may have developed a lot of people-pleasing skills. I spoke about so many layers of this in another question and response session, and in our emotional healing journey aspects of the online programs that I offer. So this boundary setting is a skill that we've got to learn to practice, a muscle we've got to start to learn to use and be comfortable using. So maybe if you live with roommates or a partner, instead of having to have this conversation every time, you might use a keyword. And maybe you let your partner know, if I let you know I'm about to go read a book, I'm going to be dilating, okay? And maybe there are even kids in the house, who knows? But you can say, hey, I'm about to go read my book, like I'll see you later. And that's perfect. That's exactly what you choose to make it work. Possibly you are living with people, but there's opportunity for you to be home alone in the house. How is it that you can really make use of those moments in your journey? And as well, I'm referring kind of to dilating here, because those are the times where you're working with your body, you're naked on your bed, you're using a dilator, there's kind of that entire environment. But please don't underestimate how much progress can be made in your home, even with people knocking on your door or entering your room, when you've got headphones in and are listening to me on video, guiding you through the entire process of having a beautiful relationship with your vulva, because this is one of our preparatory steps before dilating. This is theoretical, and yes, it involves some practical components, but there's a lot of theoretical components of the emotional and erotic pieces that can be done even when you're on the train to work and you're just listening to my voice, or another person who might be supporting you in your vaginismus journey, whether it's online or a friend or someone from a Vaginismus Sisters community. We're going to have a deeper layer of community that you can access from your phone and chat and send voice notes with each other and with myself. Have me in your back pocket on a weekly basis. These are so many of the pieces that can help, even when you don't have the time and space to be completely at ease dilating in your own space at home. So I hope some of those parts give you something to work with. I want you to know that I feel you on the pain and the difficulty of not living alone and feeling like you're constantly at the whim of someone else's energy too, because So many of us are also more sensitive to energy, and we're very often empaths. So we store a lot of other people's stuff in our bodies. That's why it's really important to do certain practices and meditations to help create that bubble of your own space and actually let go of a lot of what you're carrying that is other people's stuff, as well as call back a lot of what is your own energy that may be kind of not connected to you right now because we've lost it in different interactions. So that's a part of the energy work components that I invite people into for whoever resonates with this kind of work. But there's also other meditations that you can listen to specifically for womb healing or just body scans and pelvic floor relaxation parts. There's diaphragmatic breathing exercises that you can be practicing and reverse Kegel exercises that you can be practicing even during the work day while you're on one of those Zoom calls that you're not really needing to be involved in too much perhaps. Or you're doing any other component of your work where you're just simply sitting on a chair, you can be making a whole lot of progress in those parts before ever needing that privacy necessary. Okay, let's see if, okay, we've got no other questions so far. I'm sending you lots of love and encouragement. You're doing beautifully. You're at the perfect spot of your journey, and I know it doesn't always feel like it, but oftentimes we kind of look back and we realize why things needed to happen at a particular pace and what kind of purpose there may have been in certain situations that had us feeling like we're not really maybe making as much progress, but we needed that time to process whatever it may have been on some deeper layers, subconscious level to there's a lot I can say about that, but I invite you to consider the bigger picture. And I want you to know that you're in a beautiful space of this community. I'm so proud of you. I'm celebrating you big time for being here and listening to this conversation, for investing in yourself in this way. And I look forward to supporting you once again in our next question and response session. I'm going to be traveling back to Canada this upcoming Monday. So we won't have a question and response session next week. Lots of errands and quality family and friends time that I'd like to spend. Also being at my parents' home for that week. So before heading over to Spain a little bit later. So there's lots of adventures coming up. But what I want to say is you're going to have another beautiful experience in the group next week of a conversation that I've already had that I will invite you into so you can listen to that recording. And I'll share what our upcoming question and response schedule is going to look like, because that's going to change a little bit when we have this new opportunity for you to get involved in our community in a deeper way. So stay tuned. I'm so excited to celebrate you in your upcoming wins and milestones. Okay, have a wonderful day. Bye.